and welcome back to Misty Mountain Gaming. I'm the D&D wannabe, my name is Rob, and this week I wanted to talk to you about one of the most important skills, if not the most important skill, in Dungeons & Dragons. Perception. Perception is a unique skill in Dungeons & Dragons, because unlike medicine or arcana, our characters are constantly making use of it. Unless they are somehow ensorcelled or unconscious, their senses are constantly feeding them information about what's around them. So, when do we roll? Constantly? Never? What are the rolls good for? And what can our characters perceive when the dice aren't involved? Today, we're going to take a close look at perception so that you can get a feel for how this skill should be used in your game. Are you ready? Let's begin. Okay, let's start with the basics, and I do mean the basics. Perception is a skill that is modified by the Wisdom ability score. The Wisdom ability score measures a creature's awareness of the world around them. It controls a creature's intuition, their ability to read people and situations, as well as just generally noticing things that others might miss. And skills based on the Wisdom ability score reflect that specialty. Makes sense, right? Speaking of senses, see what I did there? Perception is specifically concerned with the 5 senses: hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, and smelling. Now, D&D is most concerned with those first 2, but let's not count the other 3 out. They can be important too. And, crucially, perception is a skill, just like athletics, stealth, and history. The Player's Handbook says that skills represent a specific aspect of an ability score, and an individual's proficiency in a skill demonstrates a focus on that aspect. That means that it is something that can be practiced, developed, and perfected in some way, whether by genetics or good old-fashioned effort. As a skill, perception's mechanical function is more clearly defined than other, more ambiguous ability checks. Here is how the Player's Handbook defines the function of the perception skill. Perception measures your awareness of your surroundings and the keenness of your senses. Then it gives some examples. The function of the perception skill can be further broken down and logically divided into 2 major categories: active checks and passive scores. Now, no official content actually refers to active checks. That's just a term that I'm going to be using in this video and likely future videos to differentiate them from passive scores. I figure you're following along. I just didn't want anybody to go search on D&D Beyond for active checks and be surprised when nothing comes up. An active ability check means that a character is actively trying to do something. Scan the horizon for signs of an approaching army. Carefully scrutinize the corridor for signs of tripwires and pressure plates. Shh. Listening intently for movement on the other side of a door in a dungeon. Or to notice signs or sounds of dangerous creatures just beyond the firelight when it's your turn on watch at night. In each case, that character is trying to sense something. They are focused on the task and they are expending effort in order to succeed. In that case, that character would make an active perception skill check, a d20 plus their wisdom modifier. If they're proficient in the perception skill, they would also add their proficiency bonus to the roll, making them that much more likely to succeed. Active perception checks are usually preceded by a player expressing their character's interest in noticing something. Tenley looks for footprints in the muddy riverbank. Dooley looks for signs of life amongst the fallen in the aftermath of the bloody battle. Pillory keeps an eye out for goblin archers in the canopy above the trail. Bella watches for ripples of movement beneath the surface of the gator-infested swamp. Or something like that. If appropriate, the Dungeon Master will call for a perception check Dice will roll to determine the success of that attempt. Rather than rolling, a Dungeon Master may choose to employ a creature's passive perception score instead of making an active check. A passive perception score is representative of a creature's average likelihood to succeed at a given task, and the mechanics match the flavor here. In order to generate a creature's passive perception score, you take the average roll on a d20, 10, plus the creature's wisdom modifier and skill proficiency bonus, if applicable, and add them all together, plus or minus any other relevant modifiers. This total number, this score, is then compared to the DC required to notice whatever it is, same as if a character had rolled an ability check. But without the randomness inherent to a die roll, the passive perception score is always going to be more reliable than an active perception check. Okay, I always try and tell you guys when I'm offering you my opinion or my homebrew versus when I'm giving you something straight out of the book. So I'm letting you know that I'm going to be reading between the lines a little bit here. Specifically, these two lines. If the passive perception score is useful when doing a task repeatedly, like searching for secret doors and traps and monsters in a dungeon, I mean, this is D&D after all. Who is not constantly on the lookout for those things? And when the Dungeon Master doesn't want to roll dice, asking your players to make perception checks always clues them into the fact that there's something that they're missing, and usually makes them act out of character. So it's nice to have a way to determine success without bringing dice into it. Shouldn't passive perception score be used as a baseline ability to perceive things when you're not rolling or actively making any sort of call? I mean, it's called the passive perception score, and the word passive directly implies no conscious effort. So, a creature with a passive perception score of, let's say 14, will always notice hidden monsters, traps, and secret doors with a DC of 14 or lower. No other rolls or rules required. My theory here is supported, I think, by the fact that perception is the only passive score that is specifically noted on the D&D 5e character sheet, and in every monster stat block. D&D thinks that this is important enough that you need to know it for every creature in the game, and that it's going to come up often enough that you need to be able to quickly reference it. This is why, even though I'm probably going to do a video at some point on other passive skill scores, that I felt the need to specifically address it in this video. Therefore, noticing things with your passive perception score is often an incidental, maybe even an accidental thing. Even if it's minding its own business, a creature can't help but notice some things. You pass by a door in the hallway and happen to overhear some furtive conversation on the other side. As you wander the halls of the haunted mansion, you feel a sudden chill as you pass by an unnatural cold spot. You raise the goblet to your lips, but catch a whiff of deadly nightshade just in time to stop yourself before you quaff the poison draught. Or just happen to notice the toes of an assassin's boots poking out from beneath the hem of the drawn curtains. In none of these cases were you actively looking for anything, but your keen senses alerted you to the presence of something out of the ordinary. That is what perception is good for, giving you new information so that you can act appropriately. Now, before we're done, let's briefly talk about perceiving hidden objects and creatures. We're going to be covering this more in a future video, but let's give you the juiciest bits for now. When you're searching for something, you need to be searching in the right area. This stands to reason, but it is worth saying. In the example given by the book, a key is hidden in a bureau drawer in amongst some clothes. No amount of searching beneath the bed is going to reveal that key, no matter how high your perception roll is. And even if you do search the bureau, you still have to make a perception check and succeed on it to find the key hidden amongst the clothes. In a similar vein, A character who goes to the bureau and begins ripping drawers out and dumping their contents on the floor may discover the key without needing to roll, revealing its location by other means. In order to reveal a hidden object, you must be looking in the correct area and roll high enough to perceive it. Or simply interact with the correct area in a way that naturally would reveal what you're looking for, such as the Scooby-Doo method of finding secret doors. Similarly, the same applies to discovering hidden creatures. Their dexterity stealth check determines the DC of the perception check you need to discover them, and you must still be looking in the correct area. However, unlike most objects, creatures often leave traces and signs of their passage. Let's say that you return to your room at the inn after a hard day of adventuring, and are currently unaware that there is a bugbear hiding in your closet, waiting to attack you while you sleep. Since you are currently unaware of the danger, your character has no reason to be making active perception checks, but their passive perception score does tell them upon entering the room that the window is not quite closed, not how they left it. So, they go over to the window, and their passive perception score, or now that they're aware that something is amiss, maybe an active perception check, might potentially reveal muddy footprints on the windowsill, or perhaps a bit of mangy fur was snagged on the locking mechanism or on one of the hinges. A character that strays close to the closet may also detect a whiff of the creature's putrid musk, or perhaps hear shallow breathing coming from within. Okay, I think we're about done, but before we are, a quick reminder. Perception doesn't represent your ability to use your senses any more than the athletics skill is representative of your ability to walk, or your history skill representative of your ability to remember. These skills represent how you perform in exceptional or dangerous circumstances. Remember, only get the dice involved when there is a risk for doing something poorly, a reward for doing something well, or when a particular task may be difficult given the circumstances. And finally, don't forget that there are limits to what this skill can and can't do, whether or not you roll well or terribly. A 29 perception check doesn't suddenly give you the ability to see through walls, and a 4 perception check doesn't mean you can't see what's directly in front of you. Remember, perception works best when it is used only to determine whether or not something difficult to detect is noticed. That's it, guys. That's the perception video. We are finally ready to talk about hiding soon. As a perennial player of rogues and a dungeon master for many more, this is an issue that's pretty close to my heart and one that I'm very excited to talk about. That said, these videos in particular do take me a minute to script and shoot and edit, so it may be a couple of weeks before we get to that one. But in the meantime, we have plenty to keep you busy. A new episode of our podcast, Bardic Twinspiration, just released on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, where my brother and I sit down to discuss Session 0. This is one of our more important episodes to date, so I highly recommend you check that one out. And I'm still running the Misty Mountain streaming channel over on Twitch. Every Monday and Friday, I'm up to something new, and I hope that you join in and can participate. This past Monday, we just released the first episode of our new actual play D&D campaign, The Rhinehold Ritual, where I sit down with voice actors, cosplay celebrities, and friends of the channel to actually play the game we've been talking about. The VOD is available right now over on our channel, link in the description, and it will be made available here on YouTube soon. As usual, be sure to subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss out on our next video. And make sure to ring the bell so that you get notified as soon as it goes up. And, if you're feeling generous, press the like button to make me feel good and make me want to make more videos. Until next time, friends and adventurers, farewell, and Godspeed. And don't forget, there are limits to what... And don't forget, there are limits to what this... And don't forget, there are limits to what this skill can and can't do. Whether you roll very...